I just want to finish by saying a few words about how I think that fits with the current political landscape and the prospects for such ideas given the state of politics as we're in now. Now, the overwhelming fact about politics now is the absence of any money. And reform costs money even when it's trying to strip state structures away. Everything costs money. So the great paradox of deregulating is that it costs a lot of money and involves a lot of regulation. So everything has to work within that frame. And the old Blair formula, which when I was in Downing Street we used to use a lot, was essentially a bribe, which is to say the professionals will get a lot more money, the remuneration will be better, conditions will be better, but as a quid pro quo, you'll have to take on a lot of reform, which we know you won't like, but this is the deal. And it was a moderately successful formula. By the same token, you also had the Labour Party behind you, not particularly interested in reform, keen to maintain the structures as they were, very, very concerned about the equity effects, rightly enough, but it always meant that progress was very slow. I don't think any of those conditions apply, funnily enough, now with the coalition government. I don't think you've got a recalcitrant party behind the reforming ministers. I don't think the Conservative backbenchers are at all interested in welfare reform one way or the other, particularly. You certainly don't have, as you did have with Labour, a series of ex-councillors who are very concerned to protect their locality and municipal responsibility. You have a lot of members of Parliament who don't have social affairs as their main interest, which in the Labour Party you almost always do. So I don't think the political barriers to reform within Parliament will be anything like as severe as they were up until 2007. That said, the monetary barriers are very severe. There really is no money, and the difficulties of trying to engender reform in the time when they haven't got any money, or they've chosen, as a consequence of the choices they've made, they're not going to have any money. Of course, there are a series of other things you might have done, but it will be a political fact for the next few years that they won't have any money. That's going to prove very, very difficult, and the political task to take a series of reforms through whilst having nothing to give is going to be very difficult, because the Conservative Party in particular have taken one lesson from the first term of the Labour government, which is they think that was a wasted term. In large part I'd agree with them, and they've decided therefore that you should do everything at once. Try and load as much as you possibly can into the first term of your administration and get all the pain out of the way. So in addition to doing an enormous deficit clearance plan, they are simultaneously trying to push through a great big reform of the school system, a colossal and unannounced reform of the National Health Service, and a whole series of changes to the structure of welfare payments and the creation of universal credit. And that's just the start of it. I mean, in addition, there are things on policing and local communities, and in fact, I could go on. The prospectus itself would take a good 15 minutes simply to go through. And there's a real danger of overload there, and there is a serious danger of something going out of control politically. Now, the most likely candidate for that, I would suggest, is the Health Service, not least because this was something we didn't anticipate coming. Andrew Lansley absolutely insists that if you are an avid reader of Conservative Party documents, which I confess I'm not, and you had followed every twist and turn of their policy proposals over the last 10 years, you'd have been able to work out that this is what he was probably going to do. And I said to him, that probably isn't enough for most people, Andrew. And you perhaps needed to do something unusual, like put it in your manifesto, or even mention it ever. I remember being in number 10 at the time when the Health Service was revealed to be in deficit. And something happened which I think will happen to the Conservative Party, which is that everybody attributed the deficit to the reforms that were currently going through the system. The reforms, in fact, were exposing the fact of the deficit, but they weren't creating it. There'd always been a deficit in the Health Service. In fact, there isn't one now for the first time in living memory, but the reforms were showing that there was a deficit, but of course everyone attributed the absence of money to the reforms. And I think that's going to happen for Andrew Lansley, is that whatever goes wrong in the Health Service, and there's always something, it will be attributed to his reform programme, whether that's relevant or not. So there's a real chance that he loses the mantle of reform and he loses the professions insofar as he's got them at all, and that is a serious problem for him. If there's anywhere where the government strategists put the brake on, I very much expect it to be health. I don't think it will be welfare. I think there's internal politics in welfare as well, in the sense that Ian Duncan Smith holds the mantle of the Tory right. He's very important to the internal coalition within the Conservative Party. He's made a strange but very quite robust alliance with Steve Webb and with Nick Clegg on universal credit. And so they've got a certain amount of resilience on the welfare side. On education, their plans are much more clearly thought through and much more advanced. They've been working on them for a very long time, and they build largely on the work for the Blair government. And Michael Gove has very cleverly brought through a lot of the people who worked on that from a long time ago, and he's well advanced in doing it. That's not to say it won't encounter resistance. It's not to say the progress won't be very slow, because I think it's bound to be. I think he's exaggerated the rapidity with which people will rush forward and build new schools. I think that's going to take a very long time. It's a smaller reform than he thinks it is, really, in the absence of profit-making schools. But nonetheless, I think that will tick over fairly well from his point of view. So they've got an awful lot going on. My quick view of the coalition, for what it's worth, is I think it will last the course. I think it will stay the whole way through. I think they've got too much invested in it for it not to do so. I think Nick Clegg was right to do what he did. I don't think he had any choice other than to go into government. The country needed a government, and he joined in, and he was right to. It was at some considerable cost, not least to himself, but he would have borne that cost whatever he'd done. Because if he'd not gone in, everyone would have said, well, there are no circumstances in which you're ever prepared to join a Conservative government, therefore you're only ever going to join Labour, therefore you might as well join the Labour Party. And their internal polling shows that they would have lost not quite as much of their support if they'd joined a Labour coalition, but almost the same. So he was damned if he did, he was damned if he didn't, but he has certainly been damned. But I think they'll hold it together. I think they'll have just about enough political capital to do a reasonable amount of reform in education and in welfare, and I think the chances of that happening in health are really quite slim. Before I go over my elapsed time, I just want to end by repeating what I said before about the Centre for Welfare Reform. I do think it's got a very strong and clear idea, and I do think that's absolutely crucial, because whenever you've got a difficult problem, you can always refer back to, this is what we think. This is who we think should be in control. This is the compass we have for guiding our way through that issue. And after 20 years of meetings with Douglas Alexander, James Purnell, Ed Miliband, I must confess I'm more confused than I was at the beginning. That reflects badly on me, not at all on them. And I'm going to hand over now to the rest of the team, who are going to tell you about what they're doing and what they've done and what they intend to do in the future. Thank you.